Today, we're going to talk about a tool that any pet parent can use to formulate and make your own dog's food at home. And especially, we talked a little bit before this with what's going on right now in pet food. You know, a lot of pet parents are alarmed and concerned, and they want to take their pet's health in their own hands. And really, it feels like at this point, the only way that we can truly know what we're giving our pets is to make it and put it together ourselves. This is the Animal Diet Formulator. It's technically an app that you download, and I'll have this all linked in the description below for those of you watching. Dr. Recker, do you want to kind of run me down a little bit with what I'm looking at here?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, Rachel, there are downloadable apps for different devices, but there is also a web version. And I tend to work in the web version, but they all function the same way. So whether your preference is a downloadable app or on the web, either way is fine. So this is the dashboard, and the brand new subscriptions come preloaded with 3 of our sample recipes, which you can see right there: the canine adult cooked chicken, the raw beef growth, the canine growth cooked chicken. So we do that to provide kind of a guide to people, an example to say, hey, look, here are some examples of complete and balanced recipes, just to kind of give you an idea of where to start. If you look at this and you think, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Well, a good place to begin is to open up one of those recipes and just look at what some of the ingredients are. And you can also play in those recipes there. Yeah, so you can see the listing of what the different ingredients are. And the 3 dots, at the side of each ingredient is the ingredient menu. And that can show you a bunch of different things there. That information tab, that'll show you what the nutrient data is for that ingredient if you are wondering. So if you click on macronutrients, you'll see how much fat versus how much protein there is. That's important for those meat ingredients because the percentage of fat makes a huge difference in the nutrient content of those ingredients. So there's where you can have kind of a closer look at the nutrient info for the ingredient if you want to. And yep, there's minerals and vitamins, fats, and amino acids. So all the micronutrient categories are there for you to look at. But don't feel like you have to look there if you don't want to. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it is not necessary that you have in your mind what those values should be and what you're looking for. But for those of you who really like to have a deep dive, that's where you can see that information.
And is this pulled from USDA database?
So most of our data does come from USDA, but you'll see that as we go to formulate a recipe together, you'll see we have some ingredients that are called ADF typicals. What that means is that we have multiple data points for that particular ingredient. So it's probably coming from USDA, but maybe it's also coming from Australia's database, New Zealand's database, the Danish database, and or sometimes we have done some testing of our own. So when we have an ADF typicals ingredient, that means we have had enough data points that we could average them, which helps to account for some natural nutrient variability, meaning that no 2 chickens are going to have the same nutrient values. No 2 leaves of spinach are going to have the same nutrient values. So we have some accounting for that variability there. The other difference is that ADF typicals ingredients have complete nutrient data. Oftentimes, USDA ingredients might be missing a data point like choline or chloride. Those are 2 very common nutrients that are essential that USDA might not list a value in their ingredient. So that doesn't mean that there isn't choline or chloride in that ingredient. It just means we don't have a value for it. In an ADF typical ingredient that's labeled as such, that will be complete information and will have all of those nutrients. So our ingredients come from a number of different sources, and we're in the process of kind of revamping our ingredients now to give the user as much information as they want. Like, where did this come from? Is this just USDA? Is this Australia data? Where's it coming from? So you'll see that coming soon in ADF. If you're interested and you're wanting to go with just ingredients from a certain source, you will have that capability.
Fantastic.
So as we look at there, that can just kind of give you a guide that you could follow if you don't know where to begin. You can look at the percentage of meat. So if you see that chicken thigh ingredient, 49.6% of the total recipe is chicken thigh. The chicken breast is about 25% of the recipe. The carrots are making up 12% of the recipe. So these are not hard and fast rules, but this is just a guide for you if you don't know where to begin. Using these preloaded recipes are a source of inspiration to kind of give you some ideas and a very loose blueprint that you can follow. So I would use those recipes in that way. Of course, you can use them as they are as well. But when you look at the nutrients tab, so right under the name of the recipe, there's the nutrients tab. Yep, right there. So if we click on that, then you can get the nutritional information from this recipe. So it's going to give you a breakdown in the macronutrients. There you see we have 22.8% protein, and that's as formulated. So that means if we take that whole batch of food, 22.8% of it is protein. Now, where it says as formulated, you can also look at that on a dry matter basis by clicking one of those arrows. Yep. So DM means dry matter. And we don't typically formulate fresh food in dry matter, but dry foods and canned foods are formulated on a dry matter basis. And we do compare foods on a dry matter basis, no matter how they're formulated. So if you want to see how this compares to another recipe, you can compare those dry matter values to give you a true apples to apples comparison.
And I think this is actually really valuable because I know I get a lot of questions of like, Rachel, here's this raw or gently cooked food that you feed your dogs, you recommend. I look at the guaranteed analysis and the protein looks much less than the kibble I've been feeding. I thought you said protein was important. So this is a good way for somebody to compare if they're comparing to, like you said, a kibble or a dry food, because it's just more apples to apples.
Absolutely. You know, fresh food is always going to have more water in it, more moisture than a dry kibble will be. So if you take all that water out, what you're left with is dry matter. And in a fresh food diet, almost always you're going to have more protein there once you remove that water when you compare that to a kibble food. So that's a great point.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then I guess actually keep going. I have a couple questions, but you're on a roll and this is awesome.
Okay. So where it says make macronutrients with the down arrow, if we click there, we can go to one of the other categories and look like at minerals there. So all of the essential minerals. So what that means, if something's essential, that means that AFCO or FEDIF or NRC have decided that dogs have to have that nutrient provided by their diet because they cannot make it on their own. And so those are the levels that we have to look at when we formulate a food. So all of the minerals that are essential are listed here. And if any one of these was not balanced, it would be highlighted red. Okay. So if it were not high enough to meet the minimum, or if it were too high that it was exceeding the maximum, it would be highlighted red. And that would tell you that you need to make an adjustment there. So if we look at the other categories there, you'll see same thing is true here. All of the vitamins that are considered essential are listed. Now, we have all of the vitamins that are tracked listed there. Some of them are not considered essential, like biotin is not currently considered an essential vitamin for dogs. So there is a note here because AFCO makes this statement in their official publication that if other things are added to a food during manufacturing that could decrease a vitamin, then companies have to show that they are accounting for that. So that's why you'll see some of those types of notations.
Okay. And then you have fats and amino acids and very cool. And omega-6, omega-3 ratio. That's very cool to see in here.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I'll point out. The formulator works on all three of the accepted nutrient profile standards. So AFCO has one. AFCO, of course, is the U.S. Body that regulates pet food insofar as it does regulate pet food. Just as an FYI, that does not mean that they approve a food or they certify it as being a good food. It just means that the company is meeting the nutrient profile that AAFCO has set forth, and they're also meeting the labeling recommendation or regulations that AAFCO has.
Sure.
So AAFCO is one of the nutrient profiles. FEDIF is another one. That is the European counterpart to AAFCO. And then NRC, which is National Research Council, they are the group that compiled all of the nutrition science a long time ago, and they set the kind of basis for here are the minimum amounts that are required to sustain life. So FEDIF and AAFCO have both made their profiles based on NRC's findings. In our software, you can choose to formulate to any one of those standards, or all three if you wish. So with the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, FEDIF does not set a minimum or a maximum. AAFCO does set a maximum of 30-1. Now, from a health perspective, we know that that is not ideal. We like to keep that ratio more 5-1 or 10-1 at most, but AAFCO will allow up to 30-1. And the EPA and DHA, those are each specific fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids that have a whole host of health benefits. AAFCO requires them for puppies and lactating mamas, but does not require them for adults. However, we track them here on the recipe, even for adult dogs, because we know that they have health benefits. So that information is there for you too.
That's pretty powerful. Is there one that you personally, if you were to be formulating for your dog, that you would pick?
Generally speaking, I formulate in FEDIF, and the reason for that is FEDIF meets annually and they update their guidelines very frequently. AAFCO does not make changes to their guidelines, their nutrient profile, very often at all. The last time was a decade or more ago. And for cats, they're still not even using the accepted calorie calculation in nutrition science. So in many ways, they're very behind. When I'm formulating for my own dog, what I tend to do actually is meet all three profiles. So I will formulate in FEDIF, which is for most nutrients, the most demanding one, and also the profile that sets the most maximums. AAFCO does not set many maximums. So it's entirely possible to make an AAFCO balanced diet that has just hugely excessive levels of vitamins or minerals, and there's no guideline set by AAFCO. FEDIF has more of those maximums. So I tend to formulate in FEDIF because it gives me the in my opinion, the best bumpers on either side, minimum and maximum. And then I will switch the profile I'm in to AAFCO and see if I meet that. I'll switch it to NRC and see if I meet that. And if I'm meeting all three nutrient profiles, then I feel confident that I am doing the best I can with the science we currently have about what our dogs need to feed their bodies to be healthy.
Do you feel, so it's a little bit of a tangent, but somewhat on topic, that the science we have right now, just in your personal opinion, is enough to know exactly what our dogs need from a micro, macro, mineral, nutrient level, like to where we feel like this is 100% what they need? Or do you feel like science still needs to catch up and we're just kind of doing the best that we have with what we have?
That's such an interesting question. As I understand it, what NRC has is they have identified, like I say, the nutrient levels that are required to sustain life. So not necessarily optimum, but we know that, if we don't provide this amount of this nutrient, dogs and cats will develop a disease process. They might die. So that, like, at the very least, I'm going to make sure I'm hitting NRC. Where I think it leaves some room for interpretation is, again, these aren't necessarily optimal levels, but if we've identified what we need to have at minimum, I want to make sure that I'm providing at least that at minimum. Sometimes I hear people talk about, yeah, but that applies to processed food. If I'm feeding fresh food, we don't have to follow those guidelines. Well, maybe, but we don't know that. No one has proven that. We don't have any science that says that. What NRC did was they used highly purified diets, which is really the only way you can do it, to identify one component at a time to determine what the need is for that particular nutrient. So it would be really hard to design a study, and it would take a lot of studies to identify, well, what if I'm feeding an entirely fresh food diet? What are the requirements at that point? We don't know. Yeah. And I just fall into the camp that says, okay, well, if we know that we need this level of nutrients to prevent disease and death, I don't feel comfortable taking the chance that, well, maybe it's less if it's fresh food. So sure. I'll just decide to feed fresh foods and just trust that Mother Nature's got it. Well, Mother Nature does a lot of things really well, but we are also the ones who are determining what goes into our dog's bowl. Our dog's not out there foraging and being able to act on that instinct of, gosh, I really need some more iodine, so I'm going to make sure I get some more iodine today. Or I'm feeling low in manganese, I'm going to search out foods that are high in manganese. We're not allowing Mother Nature to work in the same system that she would in a completely wild animal. So in my view, the science that we have, it's what we have. So I'm going to use that rather than guess.
Perfect. I think that's aligns with how, again, you obviously have a lot more expertise and experience than myself, but kind of aligns with how I was thinking about that topic. But it is something I hear quite a bit. So I appreciate your insight on that. And then I think the last one here were amino acids. So it looks like it's a similar setup here.
It is. And this does bear a little bit of a comment here. Recently, Steve Brown and I have had a number of conversations about protein levels in food. And I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here too. Activity level matters, because if we have a dog who is not very active and they are unable to consume as many calories as AAFCO says they should for their weight level, then what happens, of course, is they get fat on that food if they're consuming the prescribed number of calories. And I fell into this trap for many years as a veterinarian. I would say, oh gosh, your dog's fat, feed it less. Well, what happens when we feed a dog less of a food that's formulated to meet its needs when it's fed a prescribed amount is that, sure, that dog eats fewer calories, but it also eats fewer nutrients. So then when we're feeding less to that fat dog, he's probably not getting enough protein. He's probably not getting enough minerals, maybe not getting enough vitamins. And so then we set up for a whole host of disease states by doing that. I could talk for hours about the number of things that could be deficient when that happens, but one of them is protein. And we know that protein drives satiety to some degree, and it also is crucial for so many body systems. So if our dogs are deficient in protein, a lot of things in their bodies aren't going to work correctly. And what I see clinically is they don't lose weight either. So we're starving them and they're still fat and they're malnourished. And in particular, one of the amino acids that can be deficient in that case is tryptophan. Tryptophan plays a role in behavior. So sometimes you'll hear people say, don't feed dogs raw meat because they become aggressive. There is a tiny little kernel of truth to that if this is the scenario. If people are feeding raw meat that is super fatty, that means the fat level's high, the protein level's low, that dog might not be getting enough protein even though they're eating raw meat. And if they're deficient in tryptophan in particular, that can cause behavior changes like aggression.
Interesting.
So we have to feed dogs for their caloric needs based on their activity level, not on linear feeding directions that say feed 2 to 3% of body weight, not on the back of a bag that says feed a half a cup of food. It matters what their activity level is and what their individual calorie needs are.
So this is kind of a big topic because I don't know the current statistics, but last time I looked, it was almost half, if not more than half of dogs are clinically obese, overweight. So I think a lot of the feedback that these pet parents are getting in general, or the recommendations are given, is just to feed less. So
Yeah.
I know this video isn't about that topic, and maybe that's another topic, but at a high level, like what do we do in that situation? Because what you're sounds like what you're saying is if we just feed less, instead of 3 scoops of their dry food, we feed them 2, they may become uh, deficient in essential
Hmm.
nutrients and maybe not even lose weight, is my understanding.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a little
So,
terrifying.
yeah, yeah. And, when I had this realization, I felt awful because of how many times I had recommended that very same thing to my clients and patients over the years before I understood what was happening. I feel personally responsible for some of those dogs who are fat and undernourished. And so now that I understand how this works, I do feel an obligation to, I kind of hijack this conversation to go in that direction because,
Do it. I mean, this
because
is
it's,
valuable. Yeah, this is going to be its own
yeah,
little clip because this is really important.
yeah, it is. And that's where ADF can be useful in 2 fronts. So you can formulate a fresh food diet that is tailored to your dog's activity level and therefore the caloric needs of your dog.
Okay.
But you can also, if you can get a complete nutritional analysis from your kibble company, some of them will supply them and some of them won't. But if you can actually put that food into ADF as an ingredient, and you can analyze where it might be deficient for your dog. And with that information, you could make additions. So maybe you put in your dog's kibble and you see that he's deficient in protein and, I'll just make some things up, protein and manganese. Okay, fine. You could add in a small bit of lean meat to that bowl of kibble, and maybe some seeds or nuts or spices are also really good sources of manganese. Maybe we could just top that bowl off with some fresh food to make up for those deficiencies.
Okay, so this is another big topic because what you're saying here potentially is for the vast majority of pet parents that follow me that are feeding a dry food kibble, and we're all working on adding fresh food toppers, our number one question, or the number one question I get all the time is, well, what
Mhm.
are the best foods to top? And what you're saying is this tool can help us identify, if we're feeding a dry food, what fresh food toppers would be potentially optimal for our dogs,
Yes.
which is kind of insane. I'm like, my mind is blown because, many of us are on fixed incomes or limited incomes. And
Mhm.
so, oh, I mean, my comments and DMs are, Rachel, I literally spend more money on toppers and fresh food to add to my dog's bowl than I do for myself. So
Mhm.
I'm constantly trying to research what's the most nutrient dense so that they get the most bang for their buck. But that may not even be the best. Like this tool could help. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And in a nutshell, that's what, in my view, is so beneficial about ADF is that it's completely customizable. Like what your dog is eating right now, what your dog needs in terms of calories and therefore nutrients is what you can get from this. Not a generic, here's an adult dog recipe. Sure, we offer that, but we can customize that to your dog.
Okay. This is, my mind is blown in a good way. So, I was excited about this, but now I'm like, wow, like this is because I do get a lot of, I want to cook for my dog, but for whatever reason, I can't, or I don't have the time, or whatever it might
Mhm.
be, or I'm just
Mhm.
nervous. So this tool isn't really just for those that want to full on DIY for their dog. It could be for somebody who just wants to have the most bang for their buck on their toppers, which is pretty
Yeah,
crazy. Um,
absolutely.
okay,
Absolutely.
so I guess do you think we're good to formulate a recipe together?
I think so. Yeah.
The one question I have before we do that is, so when I first signed up for this, these
Mhm.
recipes already populated. And these, my understanding, are are these already based on the input I put about my specific dog? Because I added my dog in here, like it's already customized.
No, those are
No.
not.
Okay.
Those are, so ADF also offers some ready-made recipes for purchase that you can buy even if you're not subscribing to the software. So
Okay.
these are recipes that are that type of recipe, that they would be kind of a general healthy dog recipe, and you can customize the amounts. However, they're not tailored for like a less active dog. So the canine adult cooked chicken. So that would be for a healthy adult dog who's fairly active. The raw beef growth formula and the canine growth, those are both going to be puppy foods.
Okay.
So, generally speaking, you want to stay within the life stage that the food is designed for. As an aside, when you purchase a food, a commercial food, and it says all life stages, what that means, generally speaking, is that it's puppy food. There are a couple of nutrients that adult dogs need in higher levels than puppies, but for the most part, they're meeting puppy requirements. So I heard somebody say recently they buy all life stages foods because they thought it was better than buying a puppy food or an adult food or a less active food. And my response was, well, actually, no, in my opinion, the opposite. It's much better to have targeted nutrition so that we're giving the right amount of those nutrients to that puppy or to that adult or to that less active dog.
So, a high level way to think about this might be when we're buying commercially available food, whether it's formulated specifically for a puppy or an adult, or really just more generalities. And this tool allows us to, as you said, target the nutrition specific for my pet
Mm-hmm.
and based on their lifestyle, based on their age, which I think is really powerful, especially with, we won't go on this tangent, but with canine disease in general, diseases that are just
Mm-hmm.
plaguing our dogs. I'm not saying that or even trying to imply that commercially available foods are bad. But for those pet parents that are like, okay, I'm taking this in my own hands, like this tool sounds like it would be for them, which is pretty
Yeah,
powerful.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's make a recipe together. I inputted information for one of my dogs, so I hopefully
Awesome.
that will be helpful. But
Awesome. And I'll just also, while I'm thinking of it, and I see it there on the lower left of the dashboard, it says tips for adding ingredients. That's just a handy resource for people that gives general guidelines there. So
got
like
it.
that's what you're aiming for in your recipe. 50 to 80% of it should be proteins coming from meats, fish, and eggs. 15 to 30% organs, with some caveats in there, but that's a generality. Vegetables and fruits, 15 to 20% of the recipe is what we recommend. Healthy fats, seeds, you want to make sure you're not exceeding 6% of the recipe. Oils, typically no more than 1%. Grains, nuts, and herbs, if you need them or want to include them, you can in your recipe. You'll see there it says herbs, and I would say spices as well, no more than 0.3% for any one herb or spice. That is for palatability reasons. So herbs and spices are rich, rich, rich sources of nutrients and lots of polyphenols and beneficial other compounds that are very healthy. But if you put more than 0.3% of cinnamon in your dog's
Yeah.
recipe, he might not eat it just
Yeah.
because it's a little spicy. So 0.3% is our guideline for palatability's sake. So fibers, supplements if needed. And that's a note here. So our software is designed that you can make an entirely whole foods recipe, or you can make it with supplements or anywhere in between, whatever works best for you and for your dog. So that's one area where we're a bit different than some of the other formulation softwares available. You can make a whole foods diet with ADF, and the software will actually show you how to do that.
So I have to go on a tangent and ask you one more question then, because this is really relevant, especially what I'm asked are about vitamin synthetics or synthetic vitamins,
Mhm.
minerals. Um, and I know that there's a difference between bioavailable versus not so much bioavailable. It sounds like we're gonna need a follow up live, but can you give me just your high level thought on that? Like, are you of the mindset personally, right? I try to make all my videos, especially with veterinarians, very clear that we're not trying to prescribe, treat, recommend, diagnose. This is simply kind of what we would do
Mhm.
with our own personal animals. But are you of the
Mhm.
mindset with your own animals that it's best to feed whole food ingredients only and the nutrients, micro, macro, mineral are only coming from whole foods? Or are you of the mindset where some supplements or some vitamin synthetics could be okay?
That's such a good question. I tend to follow the approach that's called targeted nutrient fortification. So in a nutshell, what that means is I usually have some idea what I want the recipe to look like in terms of where's the main protein source coming from, what plants do I want to introduce for fiber and microbiome diversity and their beneficial effects. Like, if I have a golden retriever and they're unfortunately very prone to cancer. So I'm always mindful of that. And so I like to include a lot of ingredients that have shown some anti-cancer activity. So I might, as I'm formulating for Alice, I might think, okay, she hasn't had beef for a while. I'm going to make her a beef-based recipe, and I want to make sure that I include some broccoli for its anti-cancer activity. So, okay, great. I will start to build my recipe there, and if I can meet the rest of the nutrient needs with whole foods, I'll do so. If I can't, because either the amounts that are needed are such that it would unbalance the rest of the recipe if I were to use a whole food, or it's just not logistically feasible for me to get that whole food, then I will use a supplement to meet that particular nutrient. I personally don't use a whole lot of what I call premixes, where it's just a big package of minerals and vitamins, because I don't need all those things for all the recipes I'm doing. In one recipe, I might just need, I don't know, magnesium and zinc. So I'm just going to put in some magnesium. I'm going to put in some zinc. In another recipe, I might only need iodine and manganese. So I will just supplement with those things that are needed. That's my personal preference for my animals and for my patients where it's feasible. But you know what? If you're at a place where you're like, this is super overwhelming to me, I need to just have a meat and a veggie and then add some stuff to know that this is going to be balanced. That's out there and that's possible. And we can do that with ADF as well. And if you're on the other end of the spectrum where you're like, I don't want to use any supplements, I want to do all whole foods, cool. We can do that too. Wherever you're at, we can do it.
I love that. Very cool. Okay. I won't hijack it. I can't promise that. I'll try not to hijack it, but let's do the recipe together because I think this will be fun.
Yes. So in the upper left, right there, you click on that menu and go to Formulate Recipes. And so that's going to bring up any recipes that are in your account that you have made. And so you can search for any that you've made before by typing something into the search bar there, or you can use the filter to look for specific proteins that you've made or for a specific animal or whatever the case may be. But it is, boy, it's thinking really hard today.
I don't think I have any in here.
Okay, so it should, maybe that's why it's just loading. Oh, there we go. So it's the preloaded ones.
Oh, and then I was kind of messing with this yesterday, as you could see.
Yeah. So anything that you're working on there will appear in that list.
Okay.
But when you're ready to do a new, and if you wanted to go back to one of those, you would just click on that recipe and it would open back up for you to make changes.
Okay.
But when you're ready to make a new one, you click that big purple new button.
Great.
And that will open up the recipe creation screen. And so you would enter the pet that you're going to use. And then anything with a star you do need to enter.
Okay, so she's not in keto. Weight type, we'll do pounds. Gosh, I think she's about 58.
Perfect.
And then recipe name, I guess we'll just call this, gosh, I don't know. What's a tactic for naming these recipes?
I usually name them something that will help me find it when I want to go back and make that recipe again. So like if it's for my dog, I'll say Alice Turkey 2024 or something like that, just as a notation to me for what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And then, so here, the diet standard. So that's what I was talking about with the 3 different options. And you can choose whichever one you want. And we can come back to this screen and update that to a different profile and change what we're looking at as well.
Okay.
Now, this modified Atwater versus Atwater. So what this means is Atwater is the traditional assignment of calories to macronutrients. Fat has 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbs have 4 calories per gram. Now, AFCO uses modified Atwater calculations, and they're designed primarily for the highly processed foods. So where there's lower digestibility, lower bioavailability, they have given kind of a concession to that. And in modified Atwater, fat only has 8.5 calories per gram, and protein and carbs have 3.5 calories per gram. So it's easier to pack more nutrients into those fewer calories that are assigned. In terms of what's more accurate, whenever you're making a recipe with real food, you want to use Atwater. If you were using highly processed chicken meal or highly processed fish meal, you would use modified Atwater.
Got it. Okay. So we'll use Atwater.
Mm-hmm.
And then growth. I know this usually confuses a lot of pet parents. So could you walk through like what, not necessarily each one, but just a little bit of a summary of this?
Yes. So any of the growth stages there will shuttle you into the growth profile puppy food. And the percentage of the adult weight will just kind of give you a calorie assignment based on that. The adult profiles will impact calories. They will also impact the nutrient profile when you're in FEDF. The reason I say that is because FEDF recognizes an active adult nutrient profile and a less active adult nutrient profile. They can see and they recognize that for less active dogs, we have to pack more nutrients into fewer calories. So if you choose one of the less active profiles in FEDF, you're going to see different numbers on the formulator than if you chose an active profile. AFCO only recognizes one profile. So that's part of the reason that I formulate in FEDF, because my own dog is not very active. And so I know that I'm getting more nutrients into her calories by doing that. So generally speaking, what I would say here with activity levels is for most dogs, your dog is less active than you think she is. And I say that based on 25 years of clinical practice. When I would say to people, how active is your dog? And they'd say, oh, she's super active. Okay, great. So like, what does that look like? And people would say things like, well, you know, we've got this big fenced in backyard and she spends hours a day out there in the yard. Well, okay, is she running the fence line, digging holes, playing with other dogs? No, she's sitting under the oak tree for 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that's a bad lifestyle for her. She's probably having a lovely time. I'm just saying she's not active.
Yeah.
So for reference, my 4-year-old golden retriever gets 2 organized walks per day. So she walks for about an hour a day, and then she has other playtime and whatever. I formulate for her at ADF indoor sedentary, the lowest activity level we have.
Okay.
So just as frame of reference there. So active adult, I'm thinking something like a dog who does agility every day, or a hunting dog who's going out hunting every day. So
yeah, for Marlo, we probably get 2 to 3 miles a day. A lot of that is running. So I'd probably, probably, would that be indoor sedentary or less active, you would say?
I would probably go less active for her.
Less active. Okay.
Yeah.
She's, yeah. So,
and that doesn't sound like less active, does it? I mean, when you're describing what she does,
yeah,
I don't think most people would think that's a less active dog, but for formulation purposes, yeah.
And it's the same in humans too. I think we think we're often more active than we really are when filling these out. So I find that interesting.
Exactly.
And then she doesn't have any medical conditions, but it's still good to kind of look at this and
just as a note, that is just a record keeping feature that does not change the nutrient profiles, because there is no accepted nutrient profile for different disease states.
Okay.
So,
and then it looks like down here there's details, and I see here it says all meat should be served raw. So with this recipe, I could not gently cook it. Is that what that's saying?
No, you can. These are just kind of the stock instructions that pop up on our template, but you can change all those to say whatever you want them to say. That's just kind of general guidelines. But you'll see that we do have cooking methods in ADF. So you can formulate a raw recipe, you can formulate a gently cooked recipe, you can formulate a baked recipe. So any of those things are possible.
Okay. So at this point, I push save, I'm assuming?
Exactly. Push save, and that will create the recipe for us. And then that'll come up on our formulator. And so again, I always formulate in the web version, which looks a tiny bit different than this. So I'm getting my bearings here, but you go to ingredients,
Okay.
and you always start a recipe by just adding an ingredient. So you hit that purple plus. And what I suggest is that you start by adding in the protein that you know you want to use. So whether it's a beef or a turkey or a duck or whatever protein you want to use. So you type in beef, and all of the beef ingredients will show. First ones that will show are those ADF typicals like we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So whenever possible, I would recommend using the ADF typicals because again, they have complete data and they've been averaged from multiple sources.
Okay.
So unless you have a specific branded product that we have in our database, I would always use a typical.
Okay. So
if you want to include some organs, you can start there. I usually just as my habit, I start with my protein, my muscle protein first. And generally speaking, the leaner the meat you use, the easier it will be to meet nutrient requirements because all of those minerals and many of those vitamins are in the protein, not the fat.
Okay.
So
We could start with this like 90-10.
Mm-hmm.
And
then you can choose what units you want to add that in, and you can mix and match whatever you choose.
yeah, so let's say, I guess I'm trying to think if I'm like the pet parent, I'm going to go grab a pound of ground beef. That's not going to be probably, I'll just start with that. We can always change it later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can resize your recipe when you're done. So you can start with any amount that you want. So, okay, we've got a pound of ground beef there. And then if you know you want to include an organ, I would add that next. So if you know that you want to use some heart or some liver, or if you have access to kidney.
Oh, cool. Grass fed. That's really cool that you can have that differentiation.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's click that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, yeah, so this is a part I think might be confusing for some. Like, what is a good place to start just putting in the numbers? Just what you have available? Like, if you're going to make a big batch of it, or what do you recommend for this part?
Yeah, for a beginner, that's what I would do. I would put in what volume makes sense to me. Like how big is the package I buy this in, or how much is available to me? And I would put that in. And then as the recipe is building, you'll see the percentage next to each ingredient. And you can modify the amount of each individual ingredient up or down depending on that. So currently we have 82% of the recipe is muscle meat and 18% is organ. That will change as we add more ingredients in. But when we get to our final list of ingredients, if you're not happy with the amount of each ingredient that's in there, then you can go in and change that and get it to the proportions that you saw in our example recipes or in our tips for adding ingredients. So for right now, don't put too much pressure on how much of each thing goes in.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is I could also see a pet parent who, especially just getting started, they could just look in their fridge and freezer and like, what do I have? Input that in here and then add whatever is needed to make up the difference. That potentially could be interesting.
Exactly. So, and we may choose to add a little bit of liver as well, as that's such a great source of vitamins.
This is cool. Sorry to interrupt. Freeze dried versus gently cooked versus raw. That's crazy. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And okay. And then if there's any specific plant matter that you know you want to include in this recipe, then I would go ahead and put that in.
Let's add some broccoli.
Absolutely. Great. So if you're at this point and you think, okay, that's what I know I want to put in there, but I have no idea what else needs to go in there, then you can start looking at your nutrients.
And I'm assuming with it being red, it's not in balance, or
correct. And if we have balance, or we have met the requirements for all of our amino acids here because nothing is highlighted, but look at all those red dots on minerals, vitamins, fats. There's something in each category.
Yeah.
So all of those things that are red are not currently meeting the requirements. So if you look at one of those nutrients and you're like, okay, great, calcium. I have no idea how I can meet calcium. The cool thing is you can go to the far right side where it says 0.11 on the calcium line and double click, and it's going to bring up suggestions for you for how you can meet that nutrient.
Oh, hold on. I'm gonna do that again. I feel like that happened too fast for me. Oh, so cool. So then it'll say you need to add 1.41 grams to calcium.
Mm-hmm.
Click on the corresponding ingredient. Oh, that's amazing.
So the first things that are listed are the ingredients that are already in your recipe. And
Okay.
sometimes one of those is going to be a rich source of the nutrient you need, and you could just click it and add more of that, and then you'll be there. If you look at the amounts, in grams that it's saying, we would have to add a huge quantity of any one of those to meet calcium because none of those are rich sources of calcium. So then we go to under the recipe ingredients, it's going to list all the typicals in order. And you could just continue to page through there until you find something you like. Or where it has at the top of this select ingredient page, the filter, if we click on that, and then where it says typicals first, it currently says yes. If we switch that to no, then what that's going to do, and then apply the filter down at the bottom.
Oh.
I don't think it applied. Yeah, it's a tricky one there. Yeah, go to set filter. Okay, so now where it says other ingredients under the recipe ingredients, it's listing our entire database in order of richness of calcium. So you could go through and you'll see that we have a number of supplements in there, but there are whole foods in there as well. The supplements obviously are listed here first because they're richer sources of calcium. If you have a tablet that's just calcium, there's more calcium in that than there is in a whole food. But these are ways that you can search for an ingredient that you would like to add for calcium. So you'll see eggshell powder is a very common whole food ingredient that can be used to meet calcium needs if you're not going to use bone. So you just clicked on one of those and it automatically added the amount of calcium needed to meet the minimum calcium requirement.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I could do the same thing for the magnesium. So this is, okay, so let me go. So this top part is just showing me what's in the recipe right now.
Exactly.
And then if I go to typical, I'd have to redo the filter, it sounds like, to see the most.
If you want to take it off typicals, yes, you have to change that filter each time. It's always going to default to typicals because we like you to use typicals to get the most accurate information.
Okay. So for this one, we'll do some hemp seed. That'll be good.
Yeah.
But now
And
the calcium.
And yeah, so the calcium went deficient, and that's because we just added some fat calories to our recipe. So that is going to happen. Anytime you add something that adds a significant number of calories, it's going to throw everything else off because diets are formulated by how much nutrient there is per 1,000 calories. Okay. So if we added more calories to the recipe, we just diluted out another one of the nutrients. And that's just how it goes. That's normal. And that's what happens. And you can just continue to use that same process. Or you could say, oh, I see my calcium went deficient. I remember that I used eggshell powder. So then you can just manually change the amount of eggshell powder you have, or you can use that auto adjust feature. Either one will work.
I got it. Okay. So you could just double click on it again, find the,
and it's in your recipe. It's your first ingredient in your recipe. So then you just click right there and it added the amount to get you back up to the minimum. So here, the calcium phosphorus ratio, that will not auto adjust because it's based on 2 different nutrients, which could be coming from multiple different sources. So in this case, you see your calcium phosphorus ratio is 0.96 to 1. We need it to be between 1.1 to 1, or pardon me, 1 to 1 and 2 to 1. So we know that we need to increase our calcium to get that first number in the ratio higher than the phosphorus. Our calcium's coming from our eggshell powder. So we can go back to our ingredients and update the amount of eggshell powder. So when we see eggshell powder there, you go to the 3 dots and do update amount. And you see that, so there's a kind of a wonky number there because we asked it to auto adjust. So it told us exactly how much it needs to get up to the minimum. And you can make that a more user-friendly amount. So if we need to, you may want to put it up to 4 grams or 5 grams and see how that does for us.
Okay.
So
And then
then
go
we
back
can
to
check that.
nutrients. Okay, good. That fixed it so far.
Nice.
So then we just go
Yes.
back to
Now here, so you're on copper. Now see, it's got negatives. We're actually too high in copper right now. So we have to decrease our copper.
okay.
So in recipe ingredients, beef liver is where most of our copper is coming from. So if we click on that, it's going to take away some of the beef liver to get us down below the maximum amount that FEDIAP allows. It didn't go all the way down because it's going to have to subtract a fair amount. So sometimes you have to do that multiple times.
Okay.
Like the software will only add or decrease so much at one time. So sometimes you have to loop it.
7.01, 7.
It's almost there. I think 7 is
There
the
you go.
ceiling. Yeah.
Interesting. This is going to be so helpful, by the way, for people going through this. So
yes. And again, in that case, once you know beef liver is where your copper is coming from, you could just go to your beef liver ingredient and manually update the amount to a lesser amount. Either method of doing that will work.
Okay.
So now we're trying to balance our manganese.
There we go.
Yes.
And then, here we go.
Now trying to balance iodine. And so you'll see there, our first typical listed is kelp. Now I want to draw your attention to where it says see instructions. Anywhere you see that, that means that there's something special about that ingredient that needs a little bit of explanation. In this case, it's the fact that kelp varies dramatically in its iodine content. One kelp is not the same as another kelp. Okay. So for this ingredient, we're specifying that the amount of iodine in this kelp is 700 micrograms of iodine per gram of kelp. Now, if you wanted a full explanation for that, if you go to the 3 dots on the ingredient, and then the nutrients tab, click that. See the instructions tab there? It will give you that explanation for what you need to do to use this ingredient. So to use this ingredient in the formulator, you would match that up with a product that has 700 micrograms of iodine per gram of kelp. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to say, okay, well, I happen to have a specific product of kelp. And then you would look for that product in the database. And if we already have it in there, you're good to go and you can just use your product. If we don't have it in the database, all is not lost. You can enter your own personal custom ingredient. So you can put your product in your account and be able to use that in your formulations.
Okay. So for this one, I guess my question is, if I were to click this, how do I know which one to use? Like just plain dried kelp?
So, okay, let's click it. Let's put it in there and see how much of it we need. So if we go to ingredients, so we can see how much is in our recipe. So it put in 0.4 grams. So that's going to be what, 280 micrograms of iodine. So 1 gram using this ingredient is 700 micrograms of iodine. And the software put in 0.4 grams. So that's going to be 0.4 times 700, 40% of the 700. And I know everybody out there's going to be some people who are like, ooh, math, yeah. I don't want to do math. So you don't have to, but if you wanted to use this ingredient, you do have to do a little bit of math. So I'm just pointing out the correlation here between the amount of this ingredient that's used and the amount of iodine it's contributing to the recipe.
Right.
So 0.4 grams of this ingredient, where there's 700 micrograms in 1 full gram, means that there's 0.4 the amount of the 700. So that's 280 micrograms.
Got it.
So you can use this ingredient in your formulation and just know you're going to have to add 280 micrograms of iodine to your recipe.
Makes sense.
Even if your product doesn't say that, if your product says this has 140 micrograms of iodine, you'd have to add 2 servings of that to get to 280. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
So you can use that one, or you can find your specific product that you have and add that instead.
Okay. So we're still red. So then it must be under vitamins or, okay. So we've got
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D we're missing.
Yep.
So, okay. So this is a good one where, well, I guess we could do, well, cod liver. I wonder, well, that
Mm-hmm.
could be see instructions. So let's
Mm-hmm.
see what that says.
So that's essentially saying, again, there's a lot of variation in the amount of vitamin A and vitamin D that's in cod liver oil. So we're giving you a range of what to look for using this particular ingredient.
Interesting. You've literally thought of everything, I feel like.
We try to, and when there's something we haven't thought of, we try to add it. That's one thing that I really like about being affiliated with Animal Diet Formulator is I do a lot of demos and tutorials with people, and sometimes I hear, this is so great, but if it would just do this one other thing, it would be perfect.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear that, I take that to our tech team and I say, hey, could you make it do this one thing? And 95% of the time they're like, you know what, that's a really great idea. Yeah, we'll make it do that thing. And so it's constantly evolving and updating and improving.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful that the team is so responsive because, to be honest with you, most of the time what I say to the person who says that is, sure, we'll make it do that. And then I come back to the team and I'm like, can we do that? Because I already told them we
Yeah.
would.
Okay, so for this one for vitamin E, it also has cod liver oil. So if I put that in, okay. So that
Mm-hmm.
cut that. Let's see if we oh, click here, vitamins. So our minerals, I was worried about that. The
Yep. So we
manganese.
added some fat. So now we're going to have to up our amounts of these other nutrients.
So I could see how this could take a little bit of time, but once you do this and you make a few recipes, I feel like I'm just going to tablet for this one.
Yeah.
Feed
Yep.
it several times. You get it set up
Mm-hmm.
a few times and then you can have a few different recipes. We're going to do a tablet there. Okay. And then now on fats. All
So
right.
linoleic acid. Yep. And hemp seed is already in our recipe, and that is a magnificent source of linoleic acid. So we could just add more of that.
Oh, we're
And that probably was more fat, so it
yep.
probably skewed our iodine. So that capsule that we're adding there, that was 225 micrograms for one capsule. That doesn't mean the software automatically added a whole capsule. So that's one thing that I'll tell you to look at when you do your recipes is on that capsule, that iodine that's last in the list, you would want to make sure that you have 1 full gram of that because that's one capsule. Otherwise, it's very difficult for you to measure that out and put it in your recipe. So it's possible the software is saying you only need whatever, 0.025 grams. Yeah, but you're going to have to use 1 full capsule or tablet or whatever the case may be. So just make sure that your amount of your ingredient is logistically possible or logistically feasible to use.
Okay.
Right.
Fair. And so now that it's not red, this tells me, I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming that we're good to go. So this right
Yes.
here is our recipe. And it looks like you can
Yes.
change these up
Mm-hmm.
here or
Yes, you can resize. And I think, I don't use this format much, but I think those 3 dots right to the left of your name in the upper right, I think maybe, yes. Okay, where it says resize,
oh,
you
there it
can
is.
click on that. And then when you pick your resize type, like you could choose to resize it for the number of days that this would, of food that
Oh,
this would make.
cool.
Or you could do it for total weight or whatever makes most sense for how you want to make
That's
it.
so cool. Okay. And then so this is the final format that I would then go procure my ingredients from, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, yes. And you can print that out. So in that 3-dot menu up by your name too, there's reports. Yeah, yep, right there. And so you click new to make a report template. And that is just our stock one that comes up. You can change things on there if you wish, but you save that template down at the bottom right. And then now it's in your list and you hit the 3 dots and you can choose if you want to download that as a PDF or an Excel.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So people who do this professionally, who formulate recipes for clients could use this as well, potentially.
Absolutely. We have a lot of users who do just that. Yeah.
Cool. Cool.
Hmm.
So This is fantastic. Did I miss any hot important takes in terms of the creation? I felt like we got a lot of potential issues and then overcame them really easily, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. One thing we didn't touch much on is the cooking methods, and I think maybe they
Mm.
live in those three dots. I'm not sure where they live on this.
Or up
Yeah,
here.
that one up there. Let's see. Um, hmm. Maybe it's in the details tab under the name of the recipe. Um,
Mm.
there is a way to cook. Um, on the web version, it's right on the formulator screen. So all of the nutrients, information, and the ingredients are all visible on one screen on the web
Got it.
version. And I
Okay.
think that's why I tend to do that. But there's a cooking method that you can set there. And I'm not sure where it lives in this format, but that is an option too. So if you want to cook your recipe, what that does is it depletes nutrients when we cook, right? So especially vitamins, but some minerals as well, and some fats. And so when we apply that cooking method to the recipe, it shows you where the nutrient depletion comes in and where you need to bolster those nutrients to make sure it's still complete and balanced after you've cooked it.
Oh, that's awesome. So if I want to cook this, I could click that button on the web version and then it'll say, hey, if
Mhm.
you cook this, you might need to add a little bit more of this or less of that.
Yes, yes. And I am 99% sure the cooking feature is on the downloadable app too. I just don't know where it lives on this
Yeah.
format, but it's in there somewhere.
Yeah. I'm sure it's like people are like, it's right there. You're missing it.
Yeah.
But we know it's there. We know to look for it.
Mhm.
So one question that I get is, and I think this is when I emailed over to you about like getting like where we source, right? So
Mhm.
I know
Mhm.
obviously we can get, I know that there's different ethnic markets that might have things like
Mhm.
kidney, liver, heart. Farmers markets are good. But I do get questions around grocery store, like getting ground
Mhm.
beef from the grocery store. There's different allowable limits of salmonella in there
Mhm.
because the assumption is that um, they're going to be cooked. So if there is any pathogens, if there's any pathogens or bacteria, it would hopefully be cooked out. But for
Mhm.
example, this recipe is a raw diet, so I would be feeding this raw. Like, what are your thoughts on that and concerns, if any?
Yeah. So a couple of things that come to mind for me for that. The first is that dogs' GI tracts are a lot more able to handle it than we are. And I don't mean to suggest go feed your dog salmonella. That is not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that those lower levels that could be present in grocery store meats for most healthy dogs. That's not likely to be an issue. Now, having said that, I would still adhere to all the safe handling practices. I'm not going to buy a package of raw ground beef that looks like it's been frozen thawed, mishandled. I'm not probably going to feed it raw if it's close to its sell by date. If it looks funny, if it smells funny, I'm not going to feed it. When I'm preparing it, I'm going to make sure that I'm using all the good food handling hygiene practices. And so I can tell you that I have and I do routinely feed my own dog raw meals that I formulate using meats that I've purchased at the grocery store. So as long as you use those precautions and you choose the ingredients that appear to be safe as best you can tell, and your dog is healthy, then it's unlikely that it will be an issue.
Okay.
Mhm.
And with regard, I know that there's a couple other tools in the industry. I won't name names. One that I think a lot of conventional veterinarians will use, and another one that's more targeted to pet parents. Is there anything that makes this one kind of stand out? Not even that you're trying to sell one thing or another or promote one over another. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to identify if a pet parent is sitting here like, I don't know which one to use, what really
Mhm.
stands out about ADF?
Yeah. I think it comes down to the ability to customize. So from what I've seen, other options out there just kind of put dogs into big buckets, and you have to pick which bucket your dog fits into. But your dog may be straddling buckets. Maybe your dog doesn't fit into one bucket really well. So the fact that we offer those different activity levels that helps you to make sure you're getting enough adequate nutrition in there. That changes the nutrient profile on FEDF, so that you can make sure you're packing enough nutrients in. But also our software calculates feeding directions, the amount that you should be feeding based on the accepted equation for that calorie calculation. The other ones that I've seen, either they use the equation, but they count everyone as an active dog. So then that overfeeds a lot of dogs in the US, or they use linear feeding directions, the whole feed 2 to 3% of your dog's body weight. That we know is grossly inaccurate. It tends to underfeed small dogs and overfeed large dogs. And if the food you're feeding is just barely adequate in protein, that goes back to that discussion we were having there, that you can end up deficient in protein or other nutrients. So I think that's a big thing. The ability to have the cooking method applied and account for nutrient loss there is another big thing. Being able to select the quality of ingredients you're using is important. I have played with some other products where they do more of an auto generate of a recipe, which can be very handy. However, oftentimes the ingredients that are used are not what I would consider particularly healthful ingredients. And you can absolutely make a complete and balanced recipe with some pretty not healthy ingredients. Yes. Yeah. So ADF, you can do that on ADF if you choose those things, but ADF is not going to direct you towards a recipe using canola oil as the base oil or something like that. Likewise, ADF does not manufacture or sell any supplements, so we don't direct you toward a specific brand of supplement or say you have to use this product in order to balance a recipe. We allow you to customize based on what you want to feed your dog.
What are your thoughts on, a little tangent here, but your thoughts when I'm told, well, the ingredients don't matter when it comes to our dogs. Ingredients don't matter. It's just the nutrients that come from those ingredients. You kind of alluded to it, but what are your thoughts on that as a veterinarian?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, to me, this kind of comes back to that whole argument about, some people will say, don't feed your dog fresh foods because everything they need comes in a bag. And yes, it may meet all the essential nutrient requirements, but it doesn't make any sense to me to argue that feeding a highly processed food, the same one day in and day out every day, is better somehow than feeding a rotation of fresh foods that introduce a multitude of different nutrients, not just the essential nutrients that are listed on the nutrient profile that we were just looking at on ADF. Those are all super important. The calcium, the magnesium, the linoleic acid, all that, super important. But what about all those components of whole foods that have beneficial effects? You know, we as people say, I'm going to eat some walnuts today to get some omega-3 fatty acids, or I'm going to eat an apple to get some beneficial fiber and pectin and all of those other polyphenols that are healthy for me. And I'm going to eat these foods that have been shown to have compounds in them that promote health. Well, I think that our dogs deserve those things too. So we want to make sure we meet their essential nutrient needs. But if they're going to be eating food anyway, why don't we maximize the beneficial effects that they can get from that food?
Fair. Beautifully said. I agree with you. And as you said, almost from the common sense standpoint, it just makes the most sense. But this has been fantastic. We're definitely up on time. I think though that we went through some really important scenarios. I think I am personally very excited to dig into this, especially as we've mentioned everything going on in the pet food industry. It makes me lean even more towards just making food for my dogs. It's a lot of work, right? But I think it's the only way we can really control what goes in their system and where I can feel most confident. And I still am very excited about this potential. I just feel like it's an aha moment that you could use this to optimize the toppers that you're putting on a balanced dry food to make sure that your dogs gain the most bang for their buck. So I think this is brilliant. I'm really excited about this. I love that it's veterinarian backed, and that there's just so many ways to customize. So with that, thank you so much for being on, Dr. Records. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing and how you're helping pet parents and professionals, other veterinarians in the field. We need more individuals like you. And for those watching, please share this video and check out in the description below. I'll put the animal diet formulator link down there, or you can just go to animaldietformulator.com to find it directly. So highly encourage you to check it out and put comments and questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you on that.
Sure. So I went to vet school at Iowa State University, and I had a pretty typical veterinary education, which means, unfortunately, not a lot of coverage about nutrition and the role that it plays in our pets, our animals, and our own health and well-being and longevity and all of those things. So I kind of had the typical introduction to commercial foods, and just kind of our nutrition message was just feed a popular brand of food and everything will be okay. And as my practice life, I worked in small animal private practice, dogs and cats, for about 25 years. As that evolved, and I saw my patients have issues with all sorts of things that I was very grateful to have all of my conventional tools in my toolbox, but I was seeing that those things by themselves weren't enough. I wanted to be able to offer more. And so I did pursue certification in veterinary spinal manipulation therapy, which in a few states in the country is what you have to say when you're doing chiropractic on animals. So I am not certified in veterinary chiropractic. I'm certified in veterinary spinal manipulation therapy, which looks a lot like chiropractic, but we won't say that. And along that journey, that's where I really kind of came to see what a role food plays in our health. And so that really prompted my dive into nutrition and my interest in that, my interest in nutraceuticals and herbs and functional foods and all those kinds of things. I also, about that time, had the great honor and privilege of designing a veterinary technician program at Gateway Technical College in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. So I got to put the program together from the ground up. I wrote all the curriculum, took it through the accreditation process, got it accredited with the portion of AVMA that accredits veterinary technician programs. And what I really loved about that experience was being able to provide my students a truly holistic perspective. And I don't use that word often because it's kind of taken on all sorts of shades of meanings. But when I say holistic, what I mean is the whole. You know, I tried to give my students information from all different sorts of resources and kind of provide a well-balanced perspective on issues in veterinary medicine so that they felt educated and informed and could make good decisions for their patients and become really, really great advocates for them.